And now we have our third and final seam finish that we're going to learn about for wovens right now. We'll learn some others for knits when we start our hoodie project. So again, you're going to start with 2 of your 3x9s and construct a 5/8 inch seam allowance, again, that's closed on both ends, and press it open. I have an open seam, and now you're back at the machine to do the actual stitching on the seam finish. And the seam finish is called the straight stitch. It is P7c. And once again, it's only going to go in the seam allowances. That's the only place that needs finished. They have raw edges. So this is pretty straightforward. Instead of the zigzag like we just did, we're going to straight stitch it. We're going to try to have that just as we did the narrow close to the edge when we had it folded over. We're going to try to stitch straight here about a 1/16 to an 1/8 the most of an inch in. Now this one again is only one layer of fabric. However, the machine is going straight forward. So we'll want to make sure that you've put your machine back into the right stitch. All right. And that it is at a standard size. You don't want to go too big on this, but you don't want to go really tiny either. So I would keep it at that 2.5 or 2. Something that's a little smaller and tighter, depending on how much raveling you might feel you're going to get in the fabric. The closer or the tinier the stitch, the more secure it won't ravel past that stitching. Which is why we put it in the first place, is to avoid all of this raveling. So if you've stitched here, you know that you've got a little ways that it can still do it, but once it gets up to that stitch line, it will not continue to unravel, and you'd lose your seam allowance and seams start to split open. Okay, so let's position our needle now. And again, I went back to my 2.5 because it's pretty small on this machine, the 2.5. So we're going to do that. No back stitch because, yeah, you got it. It's a seam finish. And we don't back stitch on seam finishes. But we hold those threads though. I'm going to make sure that you're only stitching in that seam allowance. Okay, trim one end, trim the other end. Okay, threads in the thread bin right next to me so they don't get on the floor and into your wheels on your chair, or picked up by the vacuum cleaner or the duster and cause a knot in your machine. You really want to make sure that you are gathering those threads. Okay, we're going to do it on the other side. I folded everything back, only have just the seam allowance ready to do it in. And here we go. Let's see if I'm positioning my needle in the right place. There, that looks good. Hold my threads, lower my pressure foot, and we take off. You'll notice that when it's stitching just the one piece of fabric, your stitching will look a little wobbly. And that's because it doesn't have that extra space, you might say, that 2 pieces of fiber or fabric or textile allows for the hooking between the 2 threads to have a little bit of space. This doesn't, so it kind of looks a little wobbly every once in a while. So you want to make sure that you are in the right stitch, but you can expect that to happen. All right, so there we are. There is our third and final seam finish. The straight stitch. Okay, on to the next.